negotiators using AI will replace negotiators not using AI. That's a promise. And that is not going to happen 3 years from now. It's going to happen perhaps minutes from now. So we're right at the edge where we'll see that big difference between people embracing AI in their collaboration and negotiation, and they will be superior to those who don't.
Thank you so much for joining another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming back Keld Jensen. Keld is a negotiation nerd and an absolute privilege to talk with because knows more than most people on the planet about negotiations. Keld, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
So, you've got a new book coming out, and
Yes.
the book is coming. And so, what inspired you to blend AI with negotiation strategies in the Smart Negotiator?
Well, if we go back a little bit, all the way back, and this sounds in ancient time AI wise, all the way back in 2019, I actually started to do research with artificial intelligence. So that was before ChatGPT and anything else. So we were pretending that we had artificial intelligence. And we were already back then doing research where we had people negotiating with a so-called artificial intelligence that really wasn't there, but we just pretended and simulated artificial intelligence. So we were actually a little bit early, but I was very curious about technology and how technology could assist or help or perhaps be an obstacle for negotiation. So I would say we were early out trying to figure out how artificial intelligence really would work. And then obviously when ChatGPT arrived, it was hallelujah because now we really had the opportunity to test technology and see how that worked. And um, in 2023, we ran a huge study. It took us about a year, where we very briefly basically compared three different negotiations, and we repeated this study hundreds of times. So we had, and I do this very quickly, we had two teams negotiating with each other without the use of AI. We had two teams negotiating with each other where one side was using AI and the counterpart was just using traditional old school negotiation without the use of technology. And then we had the third negotiation where both parties were using AI. And basically, my idea and the reason I wrote the book was based on that study because the outcome of that research was just amazing. And we actually published a peer-reviewed paper on it because it was, I guess, the first real study on the use of AI in negotiation. So the foundation and the background and the idea to do the book actually came from that research because it was astonishing how much we learned and how surprised we were as researchers as well, looking at how AI supported negotiators. I'm sorry, that was a long answer, Sean, to your question.
That's perfect though, but it basically came out of an experiment to see what made the difference. And what was the biggest difference? What was the misconception or the idea that you wanted to challenge or prove?
I think that there's obviously a lot of critics, and that's fair. And I'm a critic of AI as well. I'm a big supporter and fan of AI, by the way, because I truly believe it's going to make us better negotiators. And I think more importantly, we're going to get better results. Having said that, obviously, you need to master the tool of AI. And it's not a shortcut to improve your negotiation. So if you are not a skilled, educated, experienced negotiator, stay away from AI. It will basically be the same as jumping into a Formula One car without having even a driver's license. I mean, would you be able to drive it a few meters? Probably, but then you would crash and burn, right? And the same thing goes with AI. So you need to have your foundation in place before start using AI. But let me emphasize one thing that is really important, and that is negotiators using AI will replace negotiators not using AI. That's a promise. And that is not going to happen 3 years from now. It's going to happen perhaps minutes from now. So we're right at the edge where we'll see that big difference between people embracing AI in their collaboration and negotiation, and they will be superior to those who don't. Back to the study, Sean, as you were just asking. The outcome really surprised me in many areas because the difference were substantial. One of the things we did was we gave them all the same exercise. So they had a simulation of a real life negotiation that they should perform. They were meeting virtually, but they were from everywhere in the world, from Canada, from South Africa, from Europe, from everywhere. And we have all these hundreds and hundreds of people. conducting this negotiation. What was interesting was that if we look at the first group, the one not using AI at all, they crashed and burned. They never managed to reach a deal within the time allocated. They did not capitalize all the value that was in the negotiation, and many of them didn't even reach a conclusion. Very traditional human being negotiation. So it was horrible. End of story. Um, if we looked at the second group, where one side was using AI and negotiating towards the counterpart who was not using AI, they did better than the first group. However, they managed typically to reach an agreement, most of them within the allocated time. They did not identify all the value in the negotiation, but they did better than the groups that had no use of AI. And finally, we could also see that they didn't really improve on trust, transparency, and relationship compared to the first negotiation because there was actually a lack of trust from the group not using AI towards the group using AI. Now, here comes the remarkable thing. The two teams where both of them were using AI and were skilled and trained in using AI were superior to any of the other two groups. First and foremost, they managed to conclude the deal in way less time than any of the other negotiations. Secondly, they capitalized basically all the value in the deal. So they came up with the perfect deal for both parties. And third, and perhaps even most importantly, this was the big surprise to me, Sean. The honesty, transparency, and openness went through the roof. So the conclusion was AI actually supported human beings in become more honest and transparent. And you know what? If you ask me why, I really can't answer that. But it's a fact. It's a scientific fact that negotiators in our study became more honest, more transparent, and more open the second both parties started to use AI. So one of the things that I think is interesting when critics saying, "Well, AI will just create a distance between people, and it cannot handle the emotional side, and emotions and relations is all human." I go, hey, hang on a second. Our study actually shown the quite opposite. It improved relationship, it improved honesty, and improved transparency. So that was one of the revolutions, and I didn't see that one coming. I had expected better outcome, capitalizing more value, but I had not seen honesty and transparency increase that much based on the use of AI. It's a big surprise to me as well.
What I love about that is there's a series of decisions in how the AI is used, and I'm fascinated by the premise, I suppose, that by prompting and receiving better questions to explore value and to discover value from the other party, to more deeply explore that more quickly, to get to one of my favorite things is digging deep to understand what really matters. That that set of questions rounds, I'm imagining, would round out the perspective, would, when augmented with AI, would round out the perspective, would round out some of the questions. And then it's up to how much you disclose to the other party. And when prompted with a good question, I think that's also part of the, hey, it looks like they're really trying to understand what matters to me instead of just trying to sell me on their position.
Mm,
And if we're really decomposing part of what effective negotiation happens, it's really understanding, not just positioning or posturing or badgering or bullying. And I think that I would imagine would serve so many. Maybe I'm getting ahead of us in the interview here, but I'm coming to some of my own ideas around the study as I'm getting to hear more about it, and so I'm really excited about it, especially in the way that the opportunity is there. And I think there were some other studies that showed for people that are involved in consulting that there was an ability to take an average consultant or a slightly below average or less experienced consultant and help augment them to become more
mm,
effective. And so I'm
mm,
imagining that there's a mirror there in
mm,
terms of the effectiveness. So I really love that. And there's a there must be an aha moment in there where you were realizing and proving that AI could really meaningfully augment that human intuition, that human emotion, that human je ne sais quoi in negotiations.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we discovered is that I think we talked about it on our last podcast, Sean. But one of the things that we address is there's often an unutilized amount of value in a negotiation, what we call economics, short for negotiation economics. And that is not rocket science. It's the asymmetric value, the difference between your cost and my value, and my cost and your value. And quite often in negotiations, negotiators are missing out on that. Very often because they're in a positional game, zero sum, I win at your expense, and you win at my expense. Now, it's no secret that I'm a big believer in collaborative negotiations, simply from a financial point of view, because I know that it creates financial more success for both parties. Now, one of the things that's interesting, and I've really been working a lot on this, is that AI in general has biases. It's not objective. People often think that AI is objective. Absolutely not, because, crap in, crap out. So AI is generating data from everything around us. It's learning from everything around us, and everything around us has biases and something. So AI, and obviously I'm a little bit happy about that, has a tendency to be a little bit more collaborative than positional. So if you really go to ChatGPT, for instance, I just mentioned that because that's the one I've been working the most in, and try and persuade it to be very combative and very positional, it will actually push back a little bit and say, hey, have you thought about being a little bit more collaborative? Have you thought about asking these questions? So it will try and push back a little bit. So it has a bias towards more collaborative negotiation. So it actually reminds me about the old sci-fi movie where technology is trying to take over because human beings are a danger to themselves. So perhaps we're seeing this in a small version already, where AI today is saying, "Hang on, Sean, should you really be that combative? Would it be better that instead of going to war, that we try and have a dialogue with the counterpart instead?" Right? So it was a surprise to me to see that AI was actually supporting the people negotiating and becoming more transparent. And it wasn't really so much because AI told them to do so. It was actually their reaction to the context and the data coming out of it. Because the bright ones, and I don't want to offend anybody, but the bright ones of the people in our test obviously took the simulation, uploaded the whole thing to AI and said, give me feedback based on that, behave like, and then they pick me or whatever negotiation expert you had out there, because that helps as well, prep AI to become somebody. And then they said, now you are, for instance, Keld Jensen or whatever, and look at this negotiation from his point of view and give me advice on how I should conduct this negotiation. And then the AI system would just completely list everything they should do, the variables that would be negotiable, variables that could generate asymmetric value, prepare the questions for the counterpart, setting up rules of the game, lots of stuff. So you basically get your script on how to negotiate. And I can't prove this from a research point of view, Sean, but I think back to what I said, they become more transparent and open and honest. I think part of the reason is because they were way better prepared than anybody else, because they had the support of AI. And I think you would agree with me that when human beings feel confident and we know what we're talking about, we are not as afraid of sharing something because we are confident in our information. And I see that often. Negotiators who are not really confident in what they're talking about are holding back because they are afraid. They feel that if they share something, they might lose out. But if you're really confident in what you're doing, you know your stuff, you know your data, you know your numbers, you are less scared of sharing. So it's an assumption. I can't prove it, but it's my assumption that that could be part of the reason why they suddenly were more open and transparent.
What I love about that is that there's an inherent reminder. And so much of business is in creating the repeatable and in creating the predictable. And generative AI is, by its very nature, probabilistic. So, to the extent that we can find ways, and humans are messy just in general. So, to the extent that we can find ways to help prepare and build confidence and set things on rails that are going to somewhere successful and not off of a cliff, I find this often to be a successful recipe for augmenting, and I think augmenting is really the right term. And there's this idea that no jobs will be taken. I mean, there are fundamentally a lot of jobs that are going to be taken, but the jobs that remain absolutely will be the ones that are augmented with. And I think that sense of how to think about the augmentation is really validated through the work that you've done. And I love that. When when you think about the one thing that people would take from your new book around negotiations and outcomes and how to augment with AI, what would that be?
I would say the first thing is getting the awareness that you should start using AI right now. Um, I'm actually still surprised, Sean, how many people that are not professionally using AI. I do quite a lot of keynotes every year. I did one just a couple of weeks ago with 600 people in the audience, professional contracting people. And I was asking them, like many others the last year, how many of you are professionally using AI? I'm not talking about looking for a recipe or finding the best way of going to Rome or whatever, but actually in a negotiation, use it for preparing your negotiation, conducting your negotiation, evaluating your negotiation, ask the right question, all that. And I counted 10 hands, Sean, out of 600. And that's not unusual. So, I work with some of the biggest corporations in the world, not going to mention any names because they're basically all the same, but so many of these organizations, sorry, have no strategy, have no policy, have no approach, have no preparation, have no nothing on how to professionally use AI in negotiation. And you know what? In all honesty, it scares the crap out of me because AI is not that new anymore. It's been around for quite a long time. And as I said earlier, negotiators using AI will replace negotiators not using AI. So I think the first thing that you should take away from my book is start using it. I mean, it's really not rocket science. I can promise you, if you read my book, you'll be able to do it immediately because it's not that complicated. I guess most of your listeners will know already that part of the secret is just know how to prompt it right. If you do the right prompting, you get the result you want to get out of it. And it's really about using the AI to the fullest. And one of the things is to mention one thing. Another thing you should take away is um, how many are rehearsing a negotiation before they get into one. So let's assume, Sean, you and I we have a negotiation with a counterpart next week. We really don't have the opportunity to rehearse that negotiation because we can't go to the counterpart and say, "Hey, before we meet on Thursday, could we sit down and practice? Just for fun." We don't do that. I don't know why, really, because it's a good exercise, but we don't. But with AI, you have the opportunity to rehearse that negotiation. Do you know what's even better? AI can run a simulation of that negotiation 1,000 times just to see what is the possible outcome. It's like a war game, right? You can sit down and practice what will happen if we do X, Y, Z. I'm doing that all the time right now. Before advising a client, I'm sitting down with AI and run that simulation, ask it to repeat that negotiation 1,000 times just to get different scenarios. I love what you said a few minutes ago, Sean, that people are messy because we are. And I would add something else that include myself, so I'm no better than anybody else. We are messy and lazy, okay? And we are definitely lazy compared to AI because AI is not lazy. And let me share a story that is a bit embarrassing for myself. But I get every week I get questions from clients saying, I'm in this negotiation, the counterpart saying this, and what should I do now? And then they want me just to reply and say, well, advice would be to you to do whatever. And I'm messy and lazy and a human being. So I'm trying to find a way where I can use the least amount of effort to give the best possible advice to my client, right? So I'm doing that. I'm writing down whatever, and I'm thinking that's enough. That's a pretty good advice. And I send it off. Now, some month ago, I was thinking, hey, what about if I ask AI instead of I'm doing it, right? So I took the request from my client, removed everything that was confidential, obviously, uploaded it to AI and said, AI, now you are me. So you are now Dr. Keld Jensen. And please reply to this question from a client as Dr. Keld Jensen. And AI did that perfectly. And do you know what's the embarrassing part is? The answer from AI were way better and detailed than my answer. So AI being me was better quality wise and detail wise than I am. Now, just to make this embarrassing, really embarrassing, Sean, I sent it out to 60 people, these two answers, the answer from me and the answer from AI pretending to be me. I sent it out to 62 people and asked them, so which of these two answers is from AI and which of these answers is from me? And 58 out of 62 got it wrong. They thought the quality answer was from me and the shorter, more simple answer was from AI. So, Sean, AI is better being me than I am being me. I think that's kind of fun.
Well, in particular, for those things where it's not necessarily your 10 out of 10 favorite thing to do. And I think this is part of where the opportunity compounds through so much of business. Just earlier today, I was meeting with one of our customers about how the diligence in controls in business, not just around negotiation, but managing the outcomes of those negotiations to make sure that those are actually done the way that they were negotiated is, I mean, it's kind of grueling sometimes because there's a lot of manual work, but that's the stuff that you can give to AI and buy back your time as an organization and have a higher level of reliability than with the right constraints when done well. And there's lots of ways to make a mess of it, but when done well, you can buy back that time and no longer need a team of 5 people to go do that. And it's a huge opportunity for leverage that it makes the difference in consistency, but you can dial up the level of detail or you can dial it down as needed, right? And so the calibration, when you've got 10 of those emails to do and it's 8 o'clock at night, you might have a few lines back for each one of them, and then you're feeling good because you've responded. But that question that comes in of what if there was an even better way, and I think this is one of those beautiful things of the ask a better question is so fundamental of dig deep to understand what really matters. And great questions are at the heart of that. And prompts are really, in many respects, just a question.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So sorry to interrupt you. I just got inspired because I would say the quality of questions. I think we can all agree that a great negotiator is really good at asking questions, right? What I find quite often is that negotiators who are not that good are just sitting there arguing all the time, but they're forgetting completely to ask the counterpart about their value, cost, interest, whatever.
No,
And
they're
AI
not,
can
Kel.
really help
No,
you
they're
on that.
not. Wait, there's an entire skit
Yeah.
about this, isn't there? No, no, no. Sorry, your 5 minutes are
Yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah. Exactly, exactly. You're absolutely right. And AI is a superb tool to help you on that as well, because if you're sitting with an RFP or proposal or whatever you got, you could just upload that and say, AI, please give me questions I should ask the counterpart that could be useful in making progress in this negotiation. And AI will be way more creative than 9 out of 10 people in coming up with really good questions. And I think I have a saying that I use quite a lot, and that is when you hear the sound of a word from a counterpart, replace the sound of the word with a cash register. And what I mean by that is very rare that a negotiator raises a topic without there's a financial value in it if you're sitting in a commercial negotiation, right? So if I'm a negotiator sitting negotiating with you, Sean, and I say, hey, Sean, could we move delivery time by 3 weeks? You shouldn't say, yes, we can do that. And no,
Ka-ching.
we can't. No, exactly. Kaching, that's the right word. You should immediately respond by asking me a question. What's the value to you, Mr. Jensen, if we actually did that, right? But so many negotiators just going, "Boop," they're going straight into argumentation mode. No, we can't do it. It will cost us a fortune. Or they'll just say yes, and that's even worse. So AI again can really help us prevent those bad negotiators just doing something stupid.
And I think this idea of training, we've often found in building and deploying our product that the very first deployment is just like hiring an intern.
Mm,
And you don't let an intern go and make significant strategic decisions,
right,
but you can give them work that somebody can go and check and monitor and
right,
approve. And then
right.
as they grow and experience and so on. So I suggest that parallel is to consider those early negotiators and how they can be augmented to accelerate their speed to productivity, to accelerate
Mm,
their ability to unlock those better outcomes. And I
mm,
think that's really what
mm,
study proved is
mm,
it is a great accelerator and augmentation. And
mm,
I
mm,
it can be a superpower to the extent that you're able to go and unlock it and learn how to use it. So I love that. And I think that really gets into that non-negotiable component of with AI augmentation, all of these other tools and technology, what are those things that become non-negotiable regardless as we move forward into a greater percentage of of these augmented negotiations?
mm. I think that's a great question. I just want to add one more thing. I just got inspired again, and that was, one of the questions I probably got the most in the last couple of years is that, I have people, especially in procurement and legal, coming to me saying, "Will I be replaced as a negotiator by technology?" And my answer to all of them is really bad because I'm saying I don't know. I have no idea. I can't predict the future. I don't think so. I don't think human beings will be replaced in any important negotiation because the relationship is still important. What we're seeing though is that there's a lot of technology coming out. There's a company that is creating what they call autonomous negotiation tool that they have successfully been selling to, for instance, Walmart and Maersk, a big shipping company, and other organizations that has so many suppliers, so they don't have the workforce to negotiate with all these suppliers. So take Walmart, for instance. I don't even know how many suppliers they got, but a lot, right? And they don't have the procurement team to sit there and physically handle all of them. So they have implemented these autonomous negotiation solutions that are now handling negotiation automatically without having any human beings being part of it. Now, the key thing is the supplier don't actually know they are negotiating with technology because they're just getting text back and forth and thinking that they're negotiating with a human being. Now, the interesting part is I was actually part of an introduction. They did an introduction in New York. I was part of that just to look at the software. And what they claimed, and what Walmart claimed, is that they actually optimized their purchasing pricing by 1.5%. And that may be true, but when I looked at the solution, the technology, and I looked at the numbers behind Walmart, I realized that this was a complete zero-sum game because I would even be rude in saying it wasn't even negotiation. It was basically a tool going out to the supplier and say, you got to reduce your prices, otherwise we're going to find somebody else. And then it did some haggling back and forth, but there was it didn't identify any value. It didn't realize any asymmetric value. It was a pure asymmetric tool. Sorry, it's pure zero-sum tool. And the founders and creators of this autonomous negotiation tool admitted that it is a zero-sum tool that is basically just creating a value to one side at the expense of the counterpart. So I have not yet, and I do have a lot of organizations that comes to me and say, "Could you take a look at our negotiation tool right now?" And I have to say, I may be a little bit picky, but I have not seen anything that have impressed me so far that would replace negotiation or negotiators in reality. It's basically most of them are just advanced contract management tools that are helping organizations handling contracts and not really true negotiations tools. So I honestly think, Sean, we are pretty far away from having real autonomous negotiation where we have two bots sitting there negotiating with each other and being able to create something really good. So back to my study, for instance, could AI have conducted that negotiation better without human beings? Absolutely not. Because the
Yep.
actual negotiation was handled by human beings, supported by AI, and I think that's, as you said, that's really the key thing here. To me, AI is a tool like a spreadsheet, you know. And that brings me to the next topic because I have a lot of people coming to me and saying, from an ethical point of view, should we tell the counterpart we're using AI? And I normally use a counter question by saying, are you telling the counterpart you're using a spreadsheet? And then people look at me like I'm stupid and saying, of course not. And they say, well, then you don't have to tell them you're using AI either. It's just a tool. I mean, if the counterpart chooses not to use a spreadsheet, well, that's really their problem, isn't it? And if they choose not to use AI, that's really their problem as well. So to me, it's just a tool to support us getting better outcome at the negotiation table.
What I love about that is this concept that it is a tool. And in building, in home improvement, in fishing, in outdoor activities, the equipment matters. And I can tell you, if you've tried to go out in winter in a wet cotton hoodie, as opposed to going out in a dry down sweater, this is a very different experience. And I think that's really the difference that we're looking at is you can keep going in negotiations in winter wearing a wet cotton hoodie, or you could put on a nice down jacket and stay nice and warm and be so much more confident and so much more comfortable. And at that point, you can have much more productive conversations. I think that that sense of pressure is a parallel in for those people that are there trying to negotiate without any kind of support and augmentation. it feels like they are under tremendous pressure. It feels like they're left out in the cold, and it feels like they're stretched for time, and they're just not comfortable. And then you're not confident. Whereas those that are out there, there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing choices. This is the same kind of equipment. And you can choose to get out there wearing, poor equipment, but it is a choice. I also I keep coming back to this idea of people being replaced. And if the negotiations software is there simply to grind suppliers, then this is not genuinely negotiations. Exactly to your point. I would consider this simply grinding suppliers with automation. And what I've found over and over and over again is that for a strong supply chain, a supplier that has been ground and ground and ground, well, guess what? Who is now the lowest priority customer? It's the one that's ground them the hardest. And I think that is one of the most important outcomes to be managed against in the over indexing or the over application of some of those new technologies. So I think there's a warning and an opportunity there in terms of augmentation, but not pure automation to the extent that it's just grinding suppliers. I've never seen a supplier that's been ground and ground and ground and ground responding the way that a strong supply chain needs them to. They've lost all incentive to.
Absolutely. I was working last year with a big grocery store chain in a country, and they didn't have monopoly, but close to. I think there were two or three big chains in that country that was dominating the market. I'm not going to mention any names. And I was working with the procurement director of this huge grocery store, and I'm not exaggerating my story. He was combative because his approach to suppliers was the following: if our suppliers have made any profit, we've not been good enough at the negotiation table. He actually said that, Sean. And I was desperately
Then
trying
he's
to
not going to
convince
have
him.
suppliers for very long, is he?
Exactly. And the point is that I told him, do you know what? You're so dominant in the market. So if you don't allow the suppliers to make a profit, they're going to go bankrupt. And do you know what he said? I don't care. Then we find another one. Now, let's just go back about 15 or 20 years. I'm actually in Denmark right now, and this happened in Denmark. You had in a certain market, you had several manufacturers. I think there was about 10 or 11 or 12 of a certain product. I'm not, again, not mentioning what. And you also had a situation where the buy side were pretty dominant in whatever we were talking about. And they had the same approach. So one supplier after the other just closed down. And you know what happened? Suddenly, one day, there was only one supplier left on the market. And now who had the power in that negotiation, Sean? Suddenly, the supplier was just sitting there saying, do you know what? That's the price. Take it or leave it. And suddenly the buyer was sitting in a situation where they had no alternative. So it's kind of a short term, stupid solution, just killing everybody out there in the market. As a buyer, you actually have an interest in keeping competition. I have a governmental institution here in Europe that I think is really clever because you know what? They are always buying from the second best. They're not buying from the biggest and the cheapest and the fastest, but they're buying from number two just to make sure there's always competition in the market. Because if you just keep buying from the best one and the cheapest and the biggest that may not create a profit, but are just trying to eliminate the competition, you may create a monopoly situation for yourself. So it's really long-term thinking that you kind of spread out your orders and make sure that you have several suppliers that can actually benefit from your business. So I don't know how we got into this whole discussion right here, but I think it's
I love
really
it.
important. The bigger you are, the more powerful you are, the more holistic and society responsibility. The greater you have to be really responsible about society in general. But that's not always what happens, is it?
And I think there's also the thinking beyond the lifespan of your role in that position. Because if you're only going to be in that job for a year or two before you move somewhere else,
Yeah.
then, it could look good for a year or two, but then it's going to trail off and leave you with a fire of one supplier left that has the monopolistic pricing power against you because they'd helped kill off
Mm,
the competition. And I think
sure.
that is one of those very, very, very important elements, and I think we can look forward to AI solutions and technology solutions helping to remind and prompt that. And the
mm,
reminder, this mindset of if a supplier
mm,
has any profit left, they've done it wrong.
mm. Sure.
I think that in and of itself is
Mm,
parasitic. And I think if we just call it that, then
mm,
um, this is a great way to just put that into a box and say this is an
mm,
unhealthy behavior,
mm.
which is unhealthy on no matter the scale. Keld,
Yeah.
I am so grateful for you, and I think you and I could keep talking for hours, but I know it's getting a little bit late for you, and very, very much appreciate your work and contribution to the community in bringing a tool to go and help so many people create leverage for so many people to go and learn how to get more out of, how to augment their own capabilities. Keld, thank you so much for what you do for the community and for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean.
Amazing. And for all of you watching, this has been another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. See you next week.